I'm Grace Nolan, 29, and the night the wind cut through my coat under the overpass, I pressed my daughter to my chest and told myself to breathe, just breathe. Rain tapped a jittery rhythm on the concrete, and every car that hissed by felt like a door closing. The tarp above us sagged with water. My arms ached, but I didn't shift because Maisie finally slept. A man in a dark suit stepped into the halo of a street lamp, the wrong kind of figure for a place like this. He said my name as if he'd been practicing it, careful and sure. I kept my eyes on his hands on the umbrella on the distance between us. "Grace," he said, "I've been looking for you." Before that night, I thought I knew exactly who my family was and how far their love reached. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold it together for a child when your own world felt like it was falling apart. I grew up on the west side of Dayton in a split level where the heat clicked on slow, and my mother taught us to put the first plate in front of a guest. Church basements and PTA bake sales were our calendar. Kindness was not a speech, but a casserole at a neighbor's door after a long week. My father worked swing shifts, and he used to say that steady hands save more than money. They steady the people around you. I believed him, and I built my days on that quiet promise. Work hard, tell the truth, take care of your own. When Maisie was born, I held her and thought that everything I understood about responsibility had just found a face. We weren't rich. We counted paychecks and clipped coupons, and if the car needed brakes, the pantry felt it. I stayed home the first months because diapers and doctor copays didn't leave much room for childcare, and Jason said we'd figure it out if I stretched the groceries a little farther. I made a game of it soups that went 2 nights' laundry hung in the bathroom when the dryer started squeaking lights off in rooms we weren't using. The apartment was small and honest, and I kept it clean because clean makes a place feel like hope. On Friday nights, we'd put Maisie in her bouncer and eat on the couch, and I told myself this is what beginning looks like. There were differences I noticed when I went across town for errands, differences that felt like a glimpse into a life that didn't belong to people like us. Wide streets lined with palms outside the new condos, a showroom window that glittered with place settings that cost more than our monthly rent, a lobby where a woman in heels asked if I needed help and used my name as if we'd met before. I told myself it was just another world, not better, not worse, just other. I didn't know then that a house with marble floors and warm air pouring from discreet vents would one day open its doors to me and my child, or that a man who could write a check without looking at his balance would know what it was to wait for a phone to ring. At the time, the contrast only made me careful, like you get when you carry a full cup down a crowded hallway. The year turned cold quicker than usual, and everything got louder in our little apartment, the pipes, the stairwell, the late-night phone vibrations that Jason started taking into the bathroom. He blamed the factory ramping up for winter orders, said extra shifts would float us through the season, and I wanted to believe him, because wanting to believe is its own kind of warmth. I tucked Maisie's fingers into mittens and made lists, formula wipes rent gas, and arranged my days around her naps and coupons and the clock on the wall. When the landlord slid a notice under the door, I folded it into my apron and told myself we'd catch up once the overtime cleared. I could carry a lot if I knew where the next step landed. One evening the stew simmered and the windows fogged, and I was wrapping leftovers while Maisie gurgled in her high chair. Jason came in late again, shoulders tight, eyes sliding past ours. He set his phone down by the sink and went for a shower, and for once the screen didn't lock. The notification banner was plain as daylight, 3 short lines and a promise to meet tomorrow, a sentence that included my life as a problem to be managed. The air thinned the edges of the room, sharpening, as if someone had drawn them with a ruler. I picked up the phone with careful fingers, and before the water stopped running, I already knew the question that was about to turn our kitchen into a place I wouldn't recognize. Jason came out of the bathroom with his hair damp and his sleeves rolled up, humming softly, like it was just another night. The phone sat between us on the counter screen, still lit, that single message burning in my mind. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice low enough to almost disappear under the sound of the faucet. He froze, eyes darting toward the screen, then to me. For a second I hoped he'd deny it, say it was a mistake. But he didn't. He just sighed, the kind of sound people make when they're tired of pretending. "Grace." "I can't do this anymore," he said. "I met someone. I need something different." The words hit harder than I expected, leaving a stillness that felt heavier than shouting ever could. I looked toward the small bedroom where Maisie slept, her tiny breath steady and soft. "She's not even walking yet," I said quietly. "You're really leaving her too." Jason ran a hand through his hair, eyes shifting toward the door. "She'll be fine," he muttered. "You're a good mom." Then he grabbed his coat and keys, walked to the door, and left without looking back. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint rain against the window. I tried to cry but couldn't. The tears just wouldn't come. I only stared at the crib through the open doorway, wondering how I would explain to my daughter that her father had chosen someone else before she even had the words to ask why. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I picked up extra shifts at the grocery store where I worked stocking shelves and bagging groceries until my feet ached. Every night I carried Maisie up the narrow stairs, humming softly while she drifted to sleep. When the bills came, I paid what I could rent first, then the utilities, whatever was left for diapers and formula. I skipped meals and drank coffee instead, the kind that tastes like burnt paper but keeps you moving. Each morning, I told myself I could do it, that all I needed was one more paycheck, one more bit of luck. But luck never came. The landlord started slipping notes under the door, bright orange ones that shouted, "Pay or vacate." I tried not to read them out loud. Maisie didn't need to hear the words. When the power company sent a shut-off notice, I sat at the table staring at the numbers, trying to make them add up to something that didn't end with me losing everything. That night, I called the only people I had left. My mother answered, her voice clipped and tired. "Mom," I just need a place for a while, just until I get back on my feet." There was a pause long enough for me to hear her breathe out. "You can come," she said finally, "but don't expect this to be permanent." The next morning, I packed 2 bags, one for me, one for Maisie, a few clothes, a blanket, her favorite stuffed rabbit. I looked around the apartment that had once been our home. The chipped paint on the doorframe where Jason and I had measured her first height, the worn couch we'd bought secondhand, the baby bottles lined neatly by the sink. It all felt smaller now, like it was folding in on itself. The bus ride back to Dayton was long and quiet. Maisie slept most of the way, her small hand wrapped around my finger. Outside, the sky was gray, the kind that makes everything look like it's covered in dust. I watched the towns roll by, rusted gas stations, shuttered diners, fields half buried in frost, and wondered if this was what failure looked like. When I stepped off the bus, my mother was waiting at the curb, her coat buttoned to her chin. She didn't hug me. She just nodded toward the car. "Put your things in the back," she said. The drive to their house took 20 minutes, but it felt longer. She didn't speak, and neither did I. When we pulled into the driveway, my father's truck was parked out front, the same one he'd had for years. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old carpet. My father sat in his recliner watching a football game, the volume turned low. He didn't look away from the screen when I walked in. "Make sure the baby doesn't cry all night," he said. "I need my sleep." I nodded, biting my lip. My mother pointed toward the stairs. "Your old room's still there," she said. "You'll have to clear some space. It's been used for storage." The room barely resembled what I remembered. Boxes lined the walls, filled with old clothes and broken lamps. Dust coated everything, and the window stuck halfway when I tried to open it. Still, it was a roof, and I told myself that was enough. I laid out Maisie's blanket in the crib I'd brought, wiped down the shelves, and whispered, "We'll be okay for now." The first few days were uneasy but bearable. I kept quiet, helped around the house, and tried to stay out of the way. My parents rarely spoke to me except to ask if I'd found another job yet. At dinner, my mother would talk about Brian, my brother, the one who had done everything right. "He just got promoted again," she said one evening, smiling proudly. "Jenna's planning another baby." My father nodded. "He's always been steady, knows how to make good choices." I stared at my plate, pushing spaghetti around with my fork, pretending the food wasn't turning cold. Maisie babbled softly in her high chair, dropping bits of bread on the floor. My mother frowned. "You should teach her to eat neatly," she said. "Brian's kids were never this messy." I cleaned up the crumbs without answering. Eventually, I found a part-time job at a nearby diner. The pay was small, but it was something. Every morning I left before sunrise, walking the 2 miles to the bus stop. I worked the breakfast shift, wiping down tables and pouring coffee until my wrists ached. I saved every tip, handing my mother part of it each week to show I was trying. She kept track in a small notebook, reminding me that I couldn't live there forever. When I came home late sometimes, she'd be holding Brian's youngest, rocking him gently while talking to Jenna on the phone. Maisie would toddle over, arms out, wanting the same attention, but my mother would turn away, muttering, "I've had enough noise today." One night, Maisie spiked a fever. Her forehead burned against my palm, and her breathing came fast. I rushed downstairs, calling for my mother. She was watching television, the glow flickering across her face. "She's sick," I said. "I don't know what to do." My mother didn't look up. "You need to handle it, Grace," she said. "We already raised our kids." I stood there holding Maisie close, the room spinning around me. Then I turned and went back upstairs, rocking her through the night while whispering that she'd be all right. After that, things grew worse. Every small noise, every laugh, every cry seemed to annoy them. My father would mutter about sleepless nights. My mother made little comments about responsibility and how some people never grow up. Brian and Jenna visited, often bringing their children. The house would light up with laughter and stories when they arrived. My mother would set out her best dishes, and my father would pour drinks, telling Brian how proud he was. Maisie and I stayed in the background, watching from the corner. When they left, the house would turn quiet again, heavy with disapproval. My mother would sigh loudly as she passed my door. "This can't go on much longer," she'd say to my father, thinking I couldn't hear. But I always could. One night, while I was in the kitchen warming a bottle, I heard them in the living room. My father's voice was low but firm. "We can't keep this up, Elaine. Brian's kids need that room when they visit. Grace has to find her own place." My mother hesitated. "She has the baby. Then she'll figure it out," he replied. The bottle slipped from my hand, clattering to the tile. They turned, startled, but I didn't wait for an explanation. I picked up Maisie and went upstairs. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep, my hands trembling. I had 2 weeks before they would ask me to leave, 2 weeks to find somewhere, anywhere for us to go. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear my father's voice echoing downstairs, cold and certain. It followed me into the silence until the first light crept through the window. The house around me felt smaller than ever, like the walls were quietly pushing us out. I knew then that the next door we stepped through might be the last one I could knock on for help. The next morning, the air in the house carried that quiet tension that sits heavy before something breaks. My father had already left for work, and my mother moved through the kitchen like she was measuring how long she could stand my presence. Maisie sat in her high chair, tapping her spoon against the tray. When I tried to smile at her, my mother turned sharply, wiping the counter even though it was already clean. "Remember what your father said," she muttered. "You have 2 weeks, maybe less if you can't keep that child quiet." Her voice was flat, the kind people use when they've already decided they're done helping. I wanted to ask why it was so easy for them to close their hearts to us, but words like that didn't fit in this house. I stayed silent, fed Maisie, and started looking through newspaper ads after she went down for a nap. Every listing felt impossible, too expensive, no children allowed, or in neighborhoods even rougher than where Jason and I had started. I called a few numbers, but the voices on the other end hung up the second I mentioned I didn't have steady work yet. The days that followed blurred together. I still worked my shifts at the diner, walking back and forth, because bus fare was money I couldn't spare. Each night, I returned to a house that wasn't a home. My mother would be on the phone with Brian, laughing about his weekend plans, her voice soft and warm in a way it never was with me. When she noticed me in the doorway, that warmth vanished, replaced by the same tight-lipped disapproval. "You're late again," she'd say, glancing toward the clock. "Dinner's over." I'd nod, take Maisie upstairs, and eat whatever scraps were left cold in the fridge. Maisie was growing fast. She'd learned to pull herself up on the crib rail, babbling proudly, as if she'd conquered the world. But every milestone seemed to irritate my parents. "She makes too much noise," my mother complained one afternoon. Brian's kids were never this wild. I smiled weakly, rocking Maisie in my arms, wishing they could see her the way I did, a bright, curious soul who only wanted love. That weekend, Brian and Jenna came to visit with their 2 children. The house transformed instantly. My mother cooked roast chicken and mashed potatoes dishes she hadn't made in years. My father brought out the good plates laughing like a man who'd never frowned. Maisie reached toward her cousins with a grin, but they ignored her, busy with the new toys Grandma had bought. When I tried to sit at the table, my mother's voice cut through the noise. "Grace, could you feed the baby in the other room? It's too crowded in here." So I sat in the living room watching from the doorway while they passed food and stories around the table. I could hear Brian's easy laughter, Jenna's polite thanks, the scrape of silverware. Maisie finished her bottle and leaned against me, half asleep. I tucked the blanket around her, staring at the glow spilling from the kitchen, and told myself not to cry. When they left the next morning, my father knocked on my door. His tone was calm, but there was no softness in it. "You heard what we said last week," he reminded me. "You'll need to be gone soon. Don't wait until the last minute." I wanted to ask where he thought I would go, but I knew the answer didn't matter to him. I just nodded and said I understand. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched Maisie breathing softly beside me, her small hand clutching her stuffed rabbit. The moonlight stretched across the faded wallpaper, and I realized that in less than 2 weeks, we'd have nowhere to go. I tried to picture the future, but all I saw was a blur of rain and empty streets. I promised myself I'd keep her safe, no matter what it cost. The next few days were filled with quiet urgency. I asked co-workers at the diner if they knew of any cheap rooms for rent. Most just shook their heads sympathetically. "Wish I could help," one of them said. "It's tough right now." I thanked her anyway. When I got home that night, my mother was folding laundry in the living room. "Did you find something yet?" she asked without looking up. "Not yet," I said. "I'm still calling around." She set down a towel and gave me that look I'd known since childhood, the one that made me feel small. "Grace, you've always been like this, waiting until it's too late." Later that week, I took Maisie for a walk just to get her out of the house. The autumn air had turned sharp, carrying the smell of rain. I pushed her stroller down cracked sidewalks, past empty lots, and the same grocery store where I used to shop when Jason was still around. We passed a park where children played on rusted swings, their parents standing nearby with warm drinks and easy smiles. I couldn't stay long. Those scenes hurt more than the cold. When we returned, my father's truck was in the driveway, engine still running. Inside, my mother and father were in the living room, voices low but urgent. I caught the end of my name before my mother saw me. "We can't keep doing this," she was saying. "It's not fair to Brian." My father nodded. Then it settled. End of the week. I stood there for a moment, too tired to argue, too numb to even ask why fairness only seemed to apply to everyone else. That evening, I began packing quietly. 2 bags, again clothes for Maisie, a few diapers, her blanket. I left the rest. The morning we left was gray and silent. My mother opened the door, but didn't follow us out. "Good luck, Grace," she said, her tone clipped, almost rehearsed. My father didn't come to the door at all. I walked down the front steps with Maisie on my hip, the wind tugging at her little hat. The house behind us looked the same as it always had, but it no longer felt like any place I belonged. I spent the next few hours calling every number I could find for boarding houses and short-term rentals. By noon, I found a small room on the edge of town. The landlord met me outside the building, a narrow man with gray stubble and eyes that never stopped moving. "Cash up front," he said. "No noise, no complaints." I handed over the last of my diner tips. The room smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper peeling in places, but there was a lock on the door and a mattress that wasn't the street. For a week, it almost felt like we'd found a small corner of peace. I kept Maisie wrapped in layers and sang to her at night songs my mother once sang to me. I told her stories about the moon and the stars, the kind that make the world feel gentle. But the money ran out faster than I thought. Without anyone to watch Maisie, I couldn't keep my shifts at the diner. I tried to bring her with me once, tucking her stroller in the corner during the slow hours. When the dinner crowd came, she started to cry. My manager walked in face tight. "Grace, this isn't a daycare," he said. "You can't bring her here." I tried to explain, but he'd already decided. "Pick up your check tomorrow," he said, turning away. By the time I carried Maisie home that night, my hands were shaking. I fed her the last of the formula, saving half for morning, and went to bed hungry. A few days later, the landlord knocked on the door. "You're behind on rent," he said flatly. I begged for more time, but he only shrugged. "Tomorrow," he said, and walked away. When morning came, our things were in the hallway, a small pile of what was left of our lives. The rain had started again, steady and cold. I called my parents one last time. My voice cracked as I said, "Please, Maisie's sick. We don't have anywhere to go." My father's voice on the other end was calm, almost distant. "Brian and the kids are coming this weekend," he said. "We can't take you back. You'll figure something out." Then he hung up. I stood there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear. Maisie whimpered softly against my shoulder, her skin warm from fever. The street around us was empty, just the sound of tires on wet pavement. I pulled her closer, tucked her under my coat, and started walking. As daylight faded, I found a spot under the highway bridge where others huddled near barrels of fire. A man offered me a torn tarp, and I spread it over us, rocking Maisie until she finally slept. The cold crept in anyway. I could hear rain hitting the concrete above, steady and unrelenting. I whispered to her, "I'm here. I won't let go." But as the wind howled through the cracks, I wondered how long I could keep that promise. Somewhere in the distance a car passed its headlights, cutting through the dark. I closed my eyes, listening to the storm and the sound of my daughter's breath. The world had gone quiet, except for the rhythm of the rain, and I held her tighter, praying that somehow morning would come with a sign that we weren't completely forgotten. That night under the bridge, the storm came hard and fast. The air turned sharp, slicing through the tarp that barely covered us. Wind carried the smell of wet concrete and oil, and every gust felt like it might sweep us away. Maisie whimpered in her sleep, her cheeks flushed and damp. I tucked her inside my coat, holding her against me until I could feel her heartbeat slow. The fire in the barrel a few feet away hissed when the rain hit it, throwing sparks into the dark. A man named Joe, who had offered us a corner of the space, pulled his blanket higher around his shoulders. "Keep her close," he said quietly. "The wind's mean tonight." Across from him, a woman named Maria tore open a packet of crackers, breaking them in half. She pressed the pieces into my palm. For her, she whispered, "You need to save your strength." I nodded, thanking her. The gesture, small as it was, felt like the last bit of kindness the world still had to give. Hours passed. Water dripped steadily from the cracks above, tapping against the concrete in a rhythm that wouldn't stop. I counted the sounds to keep myself awake. Maisie's breathing grew ragged, her skin burning under my hand. I whispered to her over and over, "Mommy's here. Just hold on, sweetheart." My throat ached from the words, but I couldn't stop saying them. By morning, the rain had eased, leaving the air heavy and cold. I pressed my palm against Maisie's forehead again. The fever was worse. I looked toward the highway, wondering if I could find help, but the thought of walking miles in soaked shoes with a sick baby made my stomach twist. I stared at the puddles gathering near the support beams, watching them ripple in the wind, and did the only thing left to do. I prayed. I hadn't done that in years, but I closed my eyes and whispered into the damp air, "Please, if anyone can hear me, give us a way out." It was nearly dusk when I saw him. At first he looked like a shadow moving through the rain, too deliberate to be another drifter. The man carried an umbrella dark against the gray sky, and his shoes gleamed even through the mud. He stopped at the edge of the bridge, scanning the figures huddled beneath it. My first instinct was fear. I pulled Maisie closer, turning slightly to block her from view. But then he said my name. "Grace." His voice carried clearly calm but sure. "Grace Nolan." The sound froze me. Hardly anyone knew where I was, not even the people at the diner. I watched as he stepped closer, the rain slipping off his coat. His face came into view under the weak light, a man in his 70s, tall, silver-haired eyes, sharp and blue like winter sky. He looked at me as if he already knew my story. "I've been looking for you," he said, "for a long time." I tightened my grip on Maisie. "Who are you?" My voice trembled half from the cold, half from disbelief. He stopped a few feet away, lowering his umbrella. "My name is Edward Harrington," he said. "I'm your grandfather." The words didn't make sense at first. "My grandfather's dead," I said, shaking my head. "That's what I was told." A faint sadness crossed his face. "That's what your father wanted you to believe." His voice softened. "But I'm here now, and I won't let you suffer another night like this." I stared at him, unable to move. Maisie coughed a small, raspy sound that snapped something inside me. I looked from her to the man standing in the rain, and for the first time in months, I let hope slip past the fear. "If you're lying to me," I said, my voice shaking, "I'll never forgive you." "You have my word," he said simply. He extended his hand, but I hesitated. The world had taken so much already, I didn't know what to trust. Yet something about him, the steadiness, the warmth behind his eyes, felt real. I nodded once, then rose, gathering the blanket around Maisie. He guided us up the embankment, holding the umbrella so the rain wouldn't touch her. When we reached the road, a black sedan idled by the curb. A driver in uniform stepped out and opened the back door. Inside, I saw an infant car seat already secured. I froze again, my breath catching. Edward noticed. "I had it prepared," he said. "I knew you had a little one." I slid inside, clutching Maisie close. The car's heat wrapped around us, the first warmth I'd felt in weeks. Maisie stopped shivering, her small body relaxing against mine. I looked out the window as we pulled away from the bridge. The fire barrel flickered smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. The drive felt endless, but I didn't ask where we were going. I was too tired to question anything. The hum of the tires on the wet pavement and the steady rhythm of the windshield wipers lulled Maisie to sleep. Every so often, I'd glance at Edward in the seat across from me. He didn't speak much, just watched the road ahead with quiet focus. Hours later, the car slowed in front of tall iron gates. Beyond them, lights glowed across a long driveway lined with palm trees. The air felt different, warmer, scented faintly with salt and flowers. "This is Tampa," Edward said, as if answering the question I hadn't asked. "My home. Your home now if you'll accept it." The gates opened smoothly, and the car rolled forward onto the circular drive of a cream-colored estate. The house stretched wide, its red tile roof gleaming under the porch lights. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Everything felt unreal. The fountains, the manicured hedges, the glow spilling from the tall windows. When the car stopped, Edward stepped out first and held the door for me. "Come inside," he said gently. "You both need rest." The front doors opened to a warm rush of light and the faint scent of lilies. A chandelier hung above polished floors, its glow catching on the curved staircase ahead. Two people appeared from the hallway, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a man in a chef's uniform. "This is May," Edward said, motioning toward the woman. "And that's Victor. They'll take good care of you." May smiled warmly. "We've been expecting you, dear," she said. "Come on, let's get the baby settled." She led me upstairs to a large room that felt more like a dream than a place meant for someone like me. A king-sized bed, soft white curtains, and beside it, a crib filled with blankets and toys. I set Maisie down gently, watching as she stirred, and then sighed, finally at peace. Edward stood at the doorway, his hands clasped. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "Get some sleep." That night, for the first time in months, I didn't fall asleep afraid. The sheets smelled of lavender, the air warm against my skin. When morning came, sunlight filled the room, bright and golden. Maisie's fever had broken. Her cheeks were cool again. I held her close, tears slipping down my face before I even realized they'd started. A knock sounded at the door. May peeked in, carrying a tray of food eggs. Toast, a small bowl of fruit. "Mr. Harrington asked me to make sure you eat," she said softly. "There's a doctor downstairs to check on the little one." Downstairs, a man with a kind smile introduced himself as Dr. Henry Collins. He examined Maisie carefully, then nodded. "She'll be fine now," he said. "She just needs warmth and rest." When they left, I sat by the window watching the breeze stir the palm leaves outside. Edward joined me after a while, setting a cup of coffee beside me. "You don't have to talk about anything yet," he said. "Just know you're not alone anymore." The words caught me off guard. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had said that to me. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Days passed, and slowly the fear began to loosen its grip. Each morning I'd wake to the sound of birds and the scent of breakfast drifting from the kitchen. Victor would smile when he saw Maisie toddle in her socks across the tile, and May would hum while folding her tiny clothes. Edward spent his mornings reading in the sunroom, always leaving a chair open beside him. One afternoon he looked up from his paper and said, "Grace, when you're ready, there's something I'd like you to see. My office downtown. I think you could help me there. I didn't understand then what he meant, but the steadiness in his voice made me believe that maybe this was more than rescue. It was the beginning of something new. That night, as Maisie slept, I stood by the window again. The reflection in the glass showed a woman I barely recognized, tired but not defeated. Outside, the palms swayed softly in the Florida wind. For the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine a future. When Edward first mentioned the idea of me joining his company, I thought he was teasing. The words sounded almost foreign in my ears. I was a woman who had spent the last year scraping together diner tips and baby formula, not someone who belonged in an office with glass walls and polished floors. But Edward wasn't smiling when he said it. He looked straight at me, hands folded on the patio table. "You've endured more than most people do in a lifetime," he said. "That kind of strength translates anywhere, especially in business." The morning air was soft and warm, the kind that carried the faint scent of orange blossoms. Maisie toddled nearby, chasing Bubbles' May blue across the yard. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but Edward's expression didn't waver. "I don't know anything about real estate," I said finally. "Then you'll learn," he replied. "We'll start from the ground up. No titles, no special treatment. You'll learn every step yourself." 2 weeks later, I walked through the front doors of Harrington Realty, clutching a borrowed briefcase. The lobby gleamed under tall skylights, and every surface reflected movement, the shuffle of heels, the sound of phones, the hum of quiet purpose. Edward had insisted I train like anyone else. No one there knew I was his granddaughter. To them, I was simply Grace, the new trainee, shadowing a senior associate. My first day was a blur of new names and endless forms. The language itself felt foreign: appraisals, escrows, contingencies. My supervisor, a patient woman named Dana Pierce, noticed my unease. "You'll catch on," she said with an encouraging smile. "Just remember, people don't buy houses, they buy stability. You know what that feels like better than most." The work came slowly at first. My voice trembled during calls, my notes ran together, and I mixed up property codes. Every mistake stung like proof that I didn't belong. But each night when I came home, Maisie would run into my arms, her laughter echoing down the hallway, and I'd remind myself why I couldn't quit. Edward never hovered. He checked in quietly, offering small nudges instead of instructions. Some mornings he'd leave a note beside my breakfast plate. "Be patient with yourself. Progress is still progress." It became a ritual I didn't know I needed. Weeks passed, then months. I began to recognize patterns: how clients paused before signing, how hesitation always carried a story behind it. I learned to listen more than I spoke. Dana noticed. "You have good instincts," she said one afternoon after a client meeting. "You don't sell houses, you make people feel safe buying them." By the end of my first 6 months, I closed my first deal, a modest condo for an older couple downsizing after retirement. When they signed, the woman squeezed my hand and said, "You remind me of my daughter," gentle but steady. I stepped into the hallway afterward and let out a shaky breath, smiling for the first time in what felt like years. Edward found out before I could tell him. He was waiting in the sunroom when I came home that evening, a soft grin on his face. "I heard congratulations are in order," he said. I tried to downplay it, but he raised a hand. "No modesty tonight. You did this yourself." He lifted his glass of iced tea in a quiet toast. For once, I believed him. Time moved differently after that. Maisie started preschool. She'd come home covered in paint, chattering about her day. I learned the rhythm of morning meetings and evening reports. The ache in my chest, the one I used to carry like a permanent weight, began to ease. I could finally breathe without waiting for the next disaster. 3 years later, I was leading my own small team. Edward had stepped back from daily operations, letting others handle what he once did himself. "You're the reason I can," he told me one afternoon watching as I reviewed contracts at his desk. "You remind me what this company was supposed to stand for." It was during that same year that the board voted on a new CEO. When my name came up, I nearly laughed out loud. But no one else did. Edward spoke last. "She's earned this through grit, not bloodline," he said firmly. "Every success you see here, she built it." When the vote passed, I sat frozen in my chair, hands trembling. The announcement brought media attention I never expected. "From homeless mother to CEO," one headline read. The words didn't feel real. Morning shows invited me to speak about resilience, about the so-called miracle of my life turning around. Sitting under studio lights, I answered as honestly as I could. It wasn't a miracle, I said. It was one small decision at a time, standing up even when standing hurt. When the cameras shut off, I returned home to find Maisie drawing at the kitchen counter. She looked up and asked, "Mommy, did you win something?" I laughed softly. "Something like that?" I said. That evening, Edward joined us for dinner. Victor made roast chicken with rosemary, the scent filling the house with a comfort I'd never known growing up. We ate together 3 generations at one table, and for the first time silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. But peace has a way of making the past stir. It began quietly, a call from the front desk one afternoon at work. "Grace, the receptionist, said there are 2 people in the lobby asking for you. They said they're family." My stomach tightened. "What are their names?" I asked. "Robert and Elaine Nolan." The room spun for a second. I hadn't heard those names spoken to me in years. For a moment, I thought I misheard. "They insist on seeing you," the receptionist added gently. "Should I send them away?" I stood smoothing the front of my jacket. "No," I said. "Tell them I'll be right down." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, I saw them immediately, my parents standing in the lobby that gleamed brighter than the home they'd once cast me from. My mother clutched her purse, eyes darting around, as if trying to memorize the wealth around her. My father's smile was forced, the kind that hides more than it reveals. "Grace," my mother said, stepping forward. "Honey, you look wonderful." Her voice trembled slightly, too sweet, too careful. My father nodded. "We saw you on television." "We're proud of you," he said, as if reading from a script. I looked at them both, remembering the night I begged for shelter with a sick baby in my arms. "Proud," I said quietly. "That's a new word for you." My mother's smile faltered. "Those were difficult times," she said quickly. "We all made mistakes." Before I could respond, the glass doors behind me opened, and Edward walked in. His presence drew every eye in the room. My father's face drained of color the instant he saw him. "Edward," my father whispered. "You're alive." Edward's expression didn't change. "Alive," he repeated evenly. "And watching." He stepped closer, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I saw what you did to your daughter, the same way you once betrayed me." The air thickened, silence stretching around us. Employees had begun to pause, pretending not to listen. Edward's tone remained calm, but every word struck clean. "You abandoned your mother. She died believing you'd return. Then you abandoned your own child. Tell me, Robert, does betrayal ever stop feeling familiar?" My father stammered, unable to form words. My mother's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe. I turned toward them, my voice steady. "The day you left us in the rain, I stopped being your daughter. I built a life without you, and I don't need you to be proud of it." They stood frozen, the weight of the moment settling over them. For once, I didn't feel small under their gaze. I felt whole. They left without another word, the echo of the doors closing behind them sounding almost final. Edward placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've carried enough pain," he said softly. "Now let it rest." When I returned to my office, I glanced at the photo on my desk, Maisie's smile beside Edward's steady grin. Outside the window, the city stretched wide and bright, every building catching the light. For the first time, the past no longer felt like a shadow I had to outrun. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I drove home with the windows down, the air warm and quiet. Maisie was waiting by the door when I walked in, her arms open. "Mommy, you're home," she said. I lifted her up, breathing in the scent of crayons and shampoo. In that small, perfect moment, I understood what Edward meant. Some chapters don't end with revenge or regret, they end with peace. And the next one I knew was only beginning. After that day in the lobby, the office felt quieter. People spoke to me with the kind of respect that wasn't about fear, but about understanding. Edward didn't mention what had happened again, and I didn't need him to. Something between us had shifted, settled maybe. The past had finally stopped knocking on my door. That evening when I came home, Maisie ran across the foyer and threw herself into my arms. Her backpack swung behind her, and her laughter filled the hall. "Mommy, guess what? I got a gold star," she said, holding up a sticker on her hand. I kissed her forehead. "I knew you would," I told her. Edward watched us from the doorway to the library, his eyes soft, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Dinner's ready when you are," he said. Victor had prepared roast chicken with rosemary and lemon the same way he used to make it when I first moved in. The three of us sat around the long oak table, the light warm and golden. Maisie chattered about school while Edward asked questions about her drawings. For a man who had once lived behind walls of wealth and silence, he had learned how to listen. After dinner, we walked out onto the back terrace. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. Edward leaned against his cane, looking out toward the garden lights. "You've done well, Grace," he said quietly. "You've faced your past and kept your dignity. That's more than most ever manage." I didn't answer, but his words stayed with me long after we went inside. In the weeks that followed, life took on a calm rhythm. Work was steady. Maisie was thriving, and Edward seemed more content than I'd ever seen him. He began spending more time in the gardens, sketching designs for a new greenhouse. "I want to see things grow," he said one morning, handing me a blueprint he'd drawn. "You should always have something that keeps growing. It reminds you life still moves forward." We launched a new branch of the company around the same time Harrington Homes, an affordable housing initiative. The idea had come from a single line I'd once said during a meeting: "No child should ever fall asleep under a bridge." Edward brought it up to the board himself. "Let her lead it," he said. "She knows what it means." Within months, we had our first development underway outside Tampa, simple homes with safe yards built for single parents and families starting over. Each time I visited the site, I felt the air shift inside me. I remembered that night under the overpass, the sound of rain on concrete, Maisie's fevered skin against my chest. I never forgot where we came from. Edward visited the site once too. The workers greeted him like an old friend, even though most knew him only as the name on their paychecks. He walked slowly among the foundations, his cane pressing into the dirt. "You've turned pain into something solid," he said, nodding toward the half-framed houses. "That's how legacies begin." At home, Maisie had started drawing pictures of houses, two bright squares with little gardens, and stick-figure families holding hands. She taped them all over her bedroom wall. "These are for people who need homes," she told me, "just like you and Grandpa helped us." I tucked her in that night, smoothing the blanket over her small shoulders. "You have a good heart, sweetheart," I said. She smiled sleepily. "Just like you." The company's growth caught the attention of the local news again, and soon after national outlets. One morning, an invitation arrived for a charity gala in Miami honoring community business leaders. Edward insisted we attend together. "It's not about publicity," he said. "It's about showing the world what comes from compassion." The evening of the event, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my dress while May helped fasten the clasp at my shoulder. "He's proud of you, you know," she said softly. "He hasn't said it enough, but he tells everyone he meets." I smiled, touched, but quiet. At the gala, the ballroom shimmered with light. Musicians played softly as guests mingled under chandeliers that reminded me of the one in Edward's foyer. When it was our turn to speak, I walked to the stage with Maisie holding my hand and Edward steady at my side. Looking out across the crowd, I thought of every step that had brought us here, the heartbreak, the hunger, the cold nights, the moments of grace that followed. "I once believed failure defined me," I said. "But life doesn't end when you fall. It begins when you rise." The audience rose in applause, but the sound barely reached me. All I could see was Edward's proud nod and Maisie's wide, bright smile. She clapped her little hands, eyes glowing under the lights. Afterward, we stepped outside into the warm Miami night. The city skyline stretched across the horizon, lights flickering against the dark. Edward took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. "Do you know what I see when I look at you two?" he said quietly. "A second chance. For both of us." We stood there for a while, the breeze carrying the faint sound of music from inside. Maisie leaned against my side, her fingers tangled with mine. Edward's gaze stayed on the sky. "You've given me back something I thought was gone," he said. "Family. Hope. The chance to leave something good behind." I looked at him, the man who had appeared from the storm, and pulled me out of despair. "You gave me that first," I said. "You believed when no one else did." He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what love really is. passing belief back and forth until both people stand tall. When we returned to Tampa a few days later, Edward spent more time resting. May noticed at first the quiet fatigue that settled around him. He brushed off her concerns, saying it was just age catching up. But as the weeks went on, the cane stayed closer to his chair, and the walks in the garden grew shorter. One afternoon, I found him sitting on the balcony sketchbook open on his lap. The drawing wasn't of houses this time, but of a small bridge. I recognized it instantly, the same one from the night he found me. He looked up when I approached, eyes distant but calm. "I wanted to remember where everything began," he said, "not for sadness, for gratitude." I sat beside him, and for a long time we didn't speak. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and rose. He reached over and took my hand. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "promise me you'll keep building. For her, for yourself." "I promise," I said. The evening breeze carried the scent of jasmine across the balcony, and somewhere below, Maisie's laughter echoed from the garden. Edward smiled, his gaze following the sound. "That's the future right there," he whispered. That night, as I tucked Maisie into bed, I felt a strange calm settle over the house. The lights from the garden cast gentle patterns on the walls, and the air felt still, almost reverent. Down the hall, Edward's door was slightly ajar, a soft glow spilling into the hallway. I paused, listening, and then quietly closed it, letting him rest. The next morning would bring a shift I could not yet see, a change that would test every promise I had made. But for that night, everything was at peace. The home that had once been a place of rescue now felt like a place of belonging, and that was enough to hold until morning. The morning sunlight drifted through the curtains, soft and gold, but something about the house felt different. The silence carried a weight that hadn't been there before. Usually Edward was already awake by this time, sitting in the breakfast nook with a cup of coffee, reading the paper, while Victor prepared pancakes for Maisie. But the chair by the window was empty, the paper still folded neatly on the counter. May met me in the hallway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were red, her voice small. "Grace," she whispered, "I think you should come upstairs." For a moment, the world seemed to narrow around her words. My heartbeat filled the space where sound should have been. I followed her up the staircase, every step echoing too loudly against the quiet. Edward's door was open. The morning light spilled across the floor, falling over the edge of his bed. He looked peaceful, his head turned slightly toward the window as if he'd just fallen asleep. His sketchbook still rested on the nightstand, the pencil lying across the page with a half-drawn line, "Doctor." Collins arrived within the hour, his face solemn. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and said what I already knew. Edward had passed sometime in the night, quietly, without pain. May covered her mouth, tears slipping down her cheeks. Victor stood behind her, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. The three of us sat in the living room after the doctor left the house, too still. Maisie wandered in holding one of her picture books. "Where's Grandpa?" she asked, her voice light and curious. I lifted her onto my lap and held her close, unable to answer right away. Later that day, I walked through Edward's study, the air filled with the faint scent of cedar and old paper. On his desk, a sealed envelope waited with my name written in his careful script. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dear Grace, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but know that peace found me before the end. I've watched you rebuild your life from ashes, not with anger, but with purpose. That strength is your inheritance. Everything I've built this home, the company, the trust now belongs to you and Maisie. I've left instructions for May and Victor to stay as long as they wish. Treat them as family as they have been to me. Use what you've been given to help others find solid ground. And when the world feels heavy, look toward the bridge where we first met. That night changed us both. You were my reminder that compassion saves more lives than fortune ever could. Love always, Edward." The letter trembled in my hands. It was the kind of message that felt both like a blessing and a farewell. I folded it carefully and pressed it against my chest, letting the tears come this time. The following week was a blur of arrangements. The funeral was small, just the people he had truly known, his staff, a few longtime associates, and the team from the company, who had become family over the years. The service took place in the garden beneath the same oak tree where he used to sit with Maisie on sunny afternoons. She placed a daisy on his casket, whispering goodbye in her small, sweet voice. When it was over, I stayed behind, sitting by the stone bench near the fountain. The air was heavy with the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. May brought me a cup of tea, setting it beside me. "He loved you like his own," she said quietly. "You gave him back his heart before the end." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work. The company needed steady leadership, and the Affordable Housing Initiative had grown faster than any of us expected. Dana took over as my deputy, guiding new teams through expansions across the state. Every ribbon-cutting ceremony felt like a continuation of Edward's promise. Each family that moved into a new home carried his spirit forward in their laughter, in the lights glowing through clean windows at night. At home, life adjusted gently. Maisie talked about Edward often, sometimes in past tense, sometimes as though he might walk in at any moment. "Grandpa said we should always build things that grow," she told me one evening, as she watered the small potted tree we'd planted on the balcony. Its leaves shimmered in the sunset light. "Then that's what we'll do," I said. One afternoon I found myself back under the bridge, the one where Edward had first appeared through the rain years ago. The city had cleaned up the area since then, repaved the sidewalk, added a small plaque honoring local outreach work. I stood there with Maisie's hand in mine, looking at the spot that had once felt like the end of everything. A few people passed by, none of them knowing what that place had meant to me. I closed my eyes and let the memory play quietly, the sound of the rain, the weight of despair, and then his voice cutting through the storm. "Grace, I've been looking for you." The words echoed softly, no longer a rescue, but a reminder. We stayed there until the sky began to darken. When I turned to leave, I noticed something near one of the support beams, an old sketchbook weathered and half buried in the dirt. I picked it up, brushing away the dust. Inside were faint pencil lines, a series of drawings of bridges, houses, gardens, and finally one of a woman holding a child beneath an umbrella. At the bottom, in Edward's handwriting, was a single note, "Keep building." I brought it home and placed it on my desk beside his last letter. That night, I wrote in my own notebook for the first time in years. Plans for new homes, schools, community centers, every page filled with ideas I hadn't let myself dream before. Months passed, and the company grew beyond what any of us expected. Maisie started kindergarten, and each morning she'd wave at the photo of Edward hanging by the front door before heading out. The world moved on, but his presence lingered quietly in every corner of our lives. The smell of coffee in the morning, the way light hit the dining room table, the sketchbook that still lay open on my desk. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I stood on the balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon. The city lights flickered on one by one, the same view Edward used to love. May joined me, resting her hand on the railing. "He'd be proud," she said softly. I nodded, watching the first star appear in the sky. Behind us, Maisie's laughter floated through the open window, mixing with the hum of evening cicadas. The house felt alive, not just with memories, but with the kind of peace that comes when every hard season finally settles into meaning. As the night deepened, I whispered a quiet thank you into the wind for the man who had once stepped out of a storm and changed everything, and for the life that had grown from that moment. Tomorrow, there would be more to build. But for now, it was enough to know that love had outlasted loss, and that Edward's promise still lived in every home we opened, every life we touched, and in the little girl who never forgot the man who saved us both. The stars above shimmered brighter against the dark, and somewhere between their quiet light and the echo of Maisie's laughter, I could almost hear his voice again, steady, kind, and sure. "You've done well, Grace." The months that followed felt softer, quieter, like the world itself had taken a deep breath. The work kept growing, new communities, new partnerships, new families finding safety in the homes we built. Each foundation poured was another promise kept. But even amid all that movement, life at home carried its own kind of stillness. The absence of Edward lingered, but it didn't hurt the same way anymore. It felt more like a presence, a calm, steady reminder that some people never really leave. Maisie had started first grade by then. Every morning she ran down the driveway with her backpack bouncing behind her, waving before the bus turned the corner. She was taller now, braver, full of questions about the world and where we came from. Sometimes she'd look up at the framed photo of Edward in the hallway and say, "I think Grandpa would have liked my drawing today." I always told her, "He does," and I meant it. One evening after she'd gone to bed, I sat on the back porch with May. The Florida air was warm, the kind that smelled faintly of rain and jasmine. Fireflies blinked across the yard. May handed me a cup of tea and said, "You've built everything he dreamed of, you know." I smiled. "He built the bridge," I said quietly. I just kept walking across it. She nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. A few weeks later, I visited one of our newest neighborhoods, a cluster of small homes surrounded by oak trees and wildflowers. Children played in the yards while parents chatted by the mailboxes. One woman saw me watching and waved me over. She had 2 little boys, their hands sticky from melting popsicles. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "Before this place, I didn't think we'd ever have a real home again." Her words caught me off guard. I felt the air thicken the same way it had when Edward once told me I'd turned pain into something solid. I realized this was what he'd meant, the quiet justice of seeing others stand where you once fell. That night I sat at my desk with Edward's sketchbook open beside me. The drawing of the bridge had faded slightly, the pencil lines soft from age. I traced them with my fingertip, thinking about how far we'd come. Everything that once felt broken had somehow turned into a path. It hadn't been luck or wealth or perfect timing. It was simply choosing every single day not to give up. Maisie came in wearing her pajamas, her hair a little wild from sleep. She climbed into my lap and pointed at the sketchbook. "You're still working?" she asked. "Always a little," I said, smiling. She studied the page, then whispered, "Grandpa's bridge." I nodded. "Yes, the one that found us both." She leaned her head against my chest, and for a long time, we just sat there listening to the night sounds, the hum of cicadas, the gentle rustle of trees. There was peace in the quiet, but also something deeper, a sense of gratitude that words could never quite hold. Looking back now, I see how every hardship, every loss, and every small act of kindness built its own kind of structure in my life. Edward used to say that real wealth isn't measured in what you keep, it's in what you build that lasts beyond you. I finally understand that. The homes, the laughter, the safety we've given to others, that's the legacy he left through us. Sometimes when I drive through the neighborhoods we've finished, I imagine him walking beside me, cane in hand, eyes crinkled at the corners, quietly proud. I don't think he'd say much. He never needed to. But I can almost hear him murmur, "You've done well, Grace." And every time I answer softly, "We did, Grandpa. We did." If you've ever lost someone who helped shape your strength or found family in places you never expected, take a moment tonight to think of them. Let them know in your own way that their kindness still echoes through your life. And if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs a little light. Sometimes that's all it takes to help another person find their bridge out of the storm.